You have walked out of a room feeling like something was deeply wrong, but you could not explain what. You have agreed to a demand you never intended to accept. You have felt the walls of a situation closing in on you, and only realized that it was a trap long after the door was already shut. You thought you were just unlucky. You thought the other person was simply more stubborn or more persuasive. You were wrong. You were being systematically dismantled by an invisible psychological framework. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how your mind has been hacked, manipulated, and outplayed your entire life. And you will understand it because Julius Caesar mapped the exact architecture of your vulnerabilities more than 2,000 years before you were born. It is 75 BC Aegean Sea. The water is a brilliant, unforgiving blue. A small Roman merchant vessel is intercepted by Sicilian pirates. They are the terror of the Mediterranean, ruthless men who slaughter without hesitation. They board the ship, drag a 25-year-old Roman aristocrat onto their deck, and inform him that he is now their hostage. They demand a ransom of 20 talents of silver. It is the price of his life. The young man does not beg. He does not tremble. He looks at the blood-soaked pirates, and he bursts into genuine, uncontrollable laughter. He tells them they have no idea who they have captured. He demands that they raise his ransom to 50 talents. The pirates are stunned. In an instant, the psychological dynamic of the entire ship fractures. This is the weaponization of status inversion. Caesar understands that human beings rely on predictable social scripts to feel in control. A hostage is supposed to cower. A captor is supposed to dominate. By wildly violating this script, by demanding his own price be raised, Caesar induces crippling cognitive dissonance in the minds of the pirates. He refuses the reality they have assigned him, and instead, he aggressively imposes his own. For the next 38 days, he does not act like a prisoner. He orders them to be quiet when he sleeps. He forces them to listen to his poetry. He treats them like his personal bodyguards. He breaks their authority without lifting a single blade, entirely through the sheer, arrogant force of his projected reality. Think about a negotiation you lost, a toxic relationship you stayed in, or a workplace dynamic where you were completely marginalized. You walked in knowing your worth, but the other person acted with such blinding, irrational entitlement, with such absolute conviction that they held the higher status, that your brain short-circuited. You questioned your own memory. You doubted your own value. You submitted to their reality simply because they refused to participate in yours. You did not lose because they were better than you. You lost because they successfully inverted the status dynamic, and you allowed them to write the script. Years later, in 69 BC, Caesar is a rising political force in Rome, but he is fundamentally broke. Political campaigns in the late Republic require vast sums of money for bribery, games, and public spectacles. Caesar has spent everything. He is facing total financial ruin. His creditors are circling, preparing to strip him of his property, his status, and his future. Instead of hiding, Caesar goes to Marcus Licinius Crassus. Crassus is the wealthiest man in Rome, a titan of industry and real estate. Caesar does not ask for a small loan to keep himself afloat. He asks Crassus to back his astronomical, life-destroying debts. This is not a plea for help. It is the deployment of weaponized debt. Caesar recognizes a profound flaw in human risk assessment. If you owe a man 100 pieces of silver, you are his slave. But if you owe man millions of pieces of silver, he is your partner. By indebting himself so deeply to Crassus, Caesar ensures that his own political and financial failure would be a catastrophic blow to Crassus's own empire. Crassus can no longer afford to let Caesar fail. He pays off Caesar's immediate creditors and funds his rise to power. Caesar has taken his greatest vulnerability, his impending bankruptcy, and magically transformed it into an impenetrable political shield. He forced the most powerful man in Rome to become his personal bodyguard. Think about a time you poured years of your life into a failing project, or a deeply destructive romantic relationship. You knew it was draining you. You knew it was toxic. But you had already invested so much time, so much money, so much emotional energy, that walking away felt like an unbearable loss. You doubled down. You kept funding the deficit. You stayed to protect your initial investment, entirely blind to the fact that the other person had weaponized your commitment against you. You were Crassus, trapped by your own inability to accept a sunken cost. As Caesar's political star rises, he is sent to Spain as a quaestor. The year is 68 BC. He is touring the ancient temple of Hercules in Gades. As he approaches a majestic statue of Alexander the Great, Caesar stops. The entourage watches as the ambitious Roman stares up at the conqueror. Slowly, Caesar begins to weep. He weeps openly, covering his face, overcome with a sudden, profound despair. When his men ask what is wrong, he laments that at his age, Alexander had conquered the known world, while he, Caesar, has achieved absolutely nothing. This was not a moment of private grief. It was manufactured vulnerability. Caesar understood that people do not follow perfect, untouchable statues. They follow human beings who invite them into a grand, sweeping narrative. By displaying intense emotional vulnerability in front of his men, Caesar did not look weak. He looked overwhelmingly ambitious. He bound his soldiers to him emotionally. He made them realize that he carried a massive, unfulfilled destiny inside his chest, and he made them feel that they were the only ones who could help him achieve it. He engineered a shared emotional debt. Think about the charismatic boss, the startup founder, or the manipulative partner who pulled you aside and shared a deep, vulnerable dream with you. They confessed their fears. They told you how much pressure they were under. They looked you in the eye and said they could not do it without you. You felt honored. You felt special. And because of that single, manufactured moment of vulnerability, you willingly worked 80-hour weeks. You compromised your boundaries, and you carried their burdens as if they were your own. They did not earn your loyalty. They hijacked your empathy. To understand how Julius Caesar survived every political trap, every battlefield disaster, and every personal betrayal, we must pause and examine the deep psychological foundation of his existence. In the ancient world, power was measured in physical mass. How much gold you held in your vaults, how many legions marched beneath your banners. But Caesar understood a terrifying truth about human nature that his enemies entirely missed. He realized that physical reality is a secondary theater of war. The primary battlefield is human perception. He knew that the human brain is a fragile, pattern-seeking machine. It craves certainty. It relies on identity, ego, and the illusion of safety to function. Caesar did not fight his enemies' swords. He fought the software of their minds. He understood that if you can rewrite the rules of a situation, if you can suddenly remove a person's sense of identity, or trap them in their own vanity, they will defeat themselves. He treated the human mind as a mechanism that could be effortlessly dismantled, provided you knew exactly which psychological wire to cut. This ruthless understanding of human psychology is put to the ultimate test in 49 BC. Caesar is stationed in northern Italy. He has conquered Gaul, but his enemies in the Roman Senate have outmaneuvered him. They strip him of his command. They order him to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. He knows that if he returns unarmed, he will be prosecuted, ruined, and likely executed. He stands on the banks of the Rubicon River, the legal boundary of Italy. To cross it with his army is high treason. It is an automatic declaration of civil war against the Roman Republic. His generals are terrified. His soldiers are hesitant. The weight of the decision is paralyzing. Caesar does not hold a debate. He does not weigh the options. He spurs his horse into the freezing water and utters the famous words, "The die is cast." This is ambiguity elimination. The human brain is crippled by the anxiety of the unmade choice. When we have a fallback plan, when we have a path of retreat, our minds split their processing power between moving forward and looking backward. We hesitate. We falter. By crossing the Rubicon, Caesar intentionally creates a state of psychological irreversibility. He legally and physically burns the boats. He forces his entire army into a state of survival-based hyper-focus. There is no longer any anxiety about what to do. There is only the brutal, singular necessity of moving forward to survive. Think about the time you agonized for months over quitting a secure, miserable job, or leaving a dead-end relationship. You were paralyzed by the options. You weighed the pros and cons until you couldn't sleep. But the moment you finally handed in your resignation, the moment you finally packed your bags and slammed the door, the terror vanished. It was replaced by a sharp, terrifying clarity. By eliminating the ambiguity, by crossing your own Rubicon, you forced your brain to stop worrying about the past and start fighting violently for your future. As the civil war erupts, Caesar marches south with lightning speed. He corners a massive Republican force at the city of Corfinium. The Republican commander, Domitius Ahenobarbus, is a bitter, lifelong enemy of Caesar. He is eventually betrayed by his own terrified men, who hand him over to Caesar in chains. Domitius expects to be tortured. He expects to be executed. Caesar does not draw his sword. He smiles. He formally pardons Domitius. He returns the man's personal fortune to him, and he lets him walk away completely free. The ancient world was stunned. But this was not an act of mercy. It was psychological sabotage. The Republican Senate had built their entire war propaganda around the narrative that Caesar was a bloodthirsty tyrant, a monster coming to slaughter the righteous. By sparing Domitius, Caesar completely shattered their narrative. He stripped the Pompeians of their moral high ground. He induced a paralyzing wave of guilt and confusion across Italy. Towns that were terrified of him suddenly threw open their gates, viewing him not as a butcher, but as a savior. He used clemency not to heal his enemies, but to intellectually disarm them. Think about the toxic ex-partner, or the manipulative colleague who suddenly forgave you for a minor mistake you made. They didn't scream. They didn't fight. They looked at you with calm, sad eyes and said, "It's okay. I forgive you. I know you didn't mean to hurt me." In that exact moment, they established absolute moral superiority. They made you feel small. They made you feel guilty. And they ensured that the next time you had a valid complaint against them, you couldn't voice it, because they had already established themselves as the forgiving, reasonable adult in the room. They weaponized mercy to keep you in chains. The civil war reaches its terrifying climax on the sun-baked plains of Pharsalus. In 48 BC, Caesar is vastly outnumbered by the Republican army, led by Pompey the Great. Pompey's ultimate weapon is his cavalry, a massive, gleaming force made up of the youngest, wealthiest, and most aristocratic men in Rome. They are the golden youth of the Republic, eager to ride down Caesar's exhausted veterans. Caesar observes the glittering ranks of the enemy cavalry. He understands exactly who they are. He issues a strange, highly specific order to his infantry. He tells them not to throw their javelins. He tells them to use them as spears. And he orders them, explicitly, to strike only at the faces of the enemy riders. This is the exploitation of narcissism. Caesar knows that these young aristocrats do not fear death as much as they fear disfigurement. Their entire identity, their social status, and their ego are tied to their physical beauty and their pristine vanity. When the Pompeian cavalry charges, Caesar's men thrust their heavy iron spears directly into the faces of the elite riders. The psychological shock is instantaneous. The aristocrats, faced with the terrifying prospect of a ruined face and a lifetime of physical humiliation, panic. Their vanity overrides their discipline. They break their ranks. They cover their faces with their hands and flee the battlefield in absolute terror. Caesar dismantles the greatest cavalry in the world by simply understanding their ego better than their commander did. Think about a time you were in a high-stakes meeting or a tense social gathering, and a rival wanted to tear you down. They didn't attack your actual work. They didn't attack your logic. Instead, they made a subtle, passing comment about your deepest, most hidden insecurity. They mentioned your lack of a specific degree, or they made a joke about your age, or they highlighted a physical flaw you were desperately trying to hide. Your brain flooded with cortisol. Your logic evaporated. You stumbled over your words, your face flushed, and you lost the entire argument, simply because they bypassed your intellect and threw a spear directly at your vanity. Caesar pursues Pompey to Egypt, only to find himself dragged into a treacherous local civil war. He is trapped inside the royal palace of Alexandria, vastly outnumbered by the Egyptian army. The Egyptian forces are moving to seize the harbor, aiming to capture Caesar's own fleet and cut off his only avenue of escape. Caesar realizes he cannot win a conventional fight for the harbor. So, he gives a horrifying order. He commands his men to set fire to his own ships. The flames consume the Roman fleet, but the fire quickly spreads. It leaps from the docks to the warehouses, and inevitably, to the great library of Alexandria. The sky turns black with thick, choking smoke. The entire city is plunged into pandemonium. This is the deployment of strategic chaos. When you are outgunned and outmaneuvered in a structured environment, your only chance of survival is to destroy the structure itself. By setting the fire, Caesar induced environmental overload. He blinded the Egyptian commanders. He broke their lines of communication. In the suffocating smoke and terror of the burning city, the Egyptians' massive numerical advantage meant absolutely nothing. Caesar used the chaos as a smokescreen to secure his position. Think about the person in your life who, the moment you confront them with a simple, damaging truth, immediately creates an explosive, dramatic distraction. You ask them why they lied about a financial decision, and suddenly they are screaming about something you did 3 years ago. They start crying, they throw an object, they threaten to leave. They set fire to the conversation. They generate so much emotional smoke and absolute chaos that you completely forget what you were originally asking. You spend the next hour trying to put out the fire, completely blind to the fact that they just used environmental overload to escape accountability. Caesar returns to Rome as the undisputed master of the world. But his veteran soldiers, the men of the legendary 10th Legion who bled for him across Gaul and Greece, are exhausted. They are tired of delayed pay and endless campaigns. They gather in the Campus Martis, demanding their discharge and their bonuses. It is a full-scale mutiny. Caesar walks out to face them alone. He does not bring bodyguards. He steps up to the rostrum. The legionaries roll their demands. They expect him to negotiate. They expect him to bargain. Caesar looks at them with eyes like ice. He agrees to their demands instantly. He tells them they are discharged. And then, he speaks one single, devastating word. He calls them Quirites citizens. He does not call them comrades. He calls them civilians. This is identity erasure. For years, these men had defined their entire existence, their self-worth, and their brotherhood by their status as Caesar's elite soldiers. It was the core of their psychological reality. By using one word, Caesar casually severs that identity. He emotionally discards them. The psychological whiplash is violent. The men are struck by profound attachment panic. The sudden, agonizing realization that they are no longer special, that they are no longer his, breaks their spirit completely. Hardened killers begin to weep. They beg him to punish them. They beg him to decimate them, to execute every 10th man, if only he will call them soldiers again. He crushed a mutiny with a single noun. Think about the moment someone you deeply admired, someone whose validation you craved, suddenly withdrew their warmth. You made a mistake, or you pushed a boundary, and instead of getting angry, they simply turned cold. They treated you with the polite, distant professionalism they would use with a stranger. They withdrew your special status. The sheer panic you felt in that moment, the desperate, clawing need to apologize, to overcorrect, to do whatever it took to get back into their inner circle, was overwhelming. You handed all your power over to them, simply because they erased your identity in their eyes. By 44 BC, Caesar is dictator for life. But he knows the political elite still resent his absolute power. He needs to know exactly how far he can push the boundaries before the public turns on him. During the festival of the Lupercalia, Caesar sits on a golden chair. His loyal lieutenant, Mark Antony, approaches and dramatically attempts to place a royal diadem, a crown, on Caesar's head. Caesar waits. He listens to the crowd. A few of his planted supporters cheer, but the vast majority of the Roman mob remains deathly silent. Caesar instantly registers the psychological baseline. He loudly and theatrically refuses the crown. The crowd erupts into deafening, genuine applause. Caesar instantly registers the psychological baseline. He loudly and theatrically refuses the crown. The crowd erupts into deafening, genuine applause. This was the calibration test. Caesar did not want to refuse the crown. He staged the entire event as a psychological probe. He pushed the boundary to see where the friction lay. Think about the subtle boundary pushers in your own life. The new manager who casually asks you to work on a Sunday. The partner who makes a slightly degrading joke in front of your friends. They are not making mistakes. They are Antony offering the crown. They are running a real-time calibration test to see how you will react. If you remain silent, if you laugh it off, they know they have successfully moved the boundary, and they will push further next time. If you push back, they will immediately act shocked, claim it was just a joke, and retreat, having gathered exactly the intelligence they needed about your psychological defenses. Gaius Julius Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March, but he did not fall because his understanding of human nature failed him. He fell because he believed he had finally transcended it. He became so arrogant in his mastery of the psychological board that he dismissed his own bodyguards, ignoring the primal, base reality of 23 desperate men with daggers. But the architecture of the mind he mapped remains completely unchanged. You now understand that power is not about who is louder or who is stronger. Power is the ability to dictate reality. You have seen how cognitive dissonance is weaponized to make you doubt your worth. You have seen how manufactured vulnerability is used to harvest your empathy, and how your own vanity is used to blind you to the traps closing in around you. You have looked into the intellectual mirror, and you have seen the invisible strings attached to your own decisions. Going forward, you can no longer plead ignorance. When the boundary is tested, when the emotional smoke screen is deployed, when the status dynamic is suddenly inverted, you must recognize the tactic. You must step outside the emotional reaction, view the interaction as a mechanical structure, and refuse to play the script they have written for you. The psychological software of humanity was mapped to millennia ago. The only question that remains is one you must answer the next time you walk into a room. Are you the architect of your own reality, or are you just a piece on someone else's board?